nation pauses to mark 1 year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Around the UK, a minute's silence in solidarity and to remember the tens of thousands who have lost their lives in the conflict so far. In Kyiv, President Zelensky praised the Ukrainian people for their resilience and promised to win the war with Russia. Also this lunchtime. A rare show of political unity in Northern Ireland after the attempted murder of an off-duty police officer in Omagh. The rising cost of supermarket own brand foods and why struggling families are being hit the hardest. And Sir Rod Stewart visits the hospital in Harlow to see the difference his money is making to waiting times.
Well, because so many things are said and no one follows through, I just want everyone to know that I followed through. It doesn't really cost a great deal of money, you know, so that's why I want to do it as many places as I can.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. It is a year since the start of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and today cities and towns around the UK fell silent to mark the sombre anniversary. The brutal conflict has seen the death of tens of thousands of civilians and troops in Ukraine, with millions more displaced. Addressing the nation early this morning, Ukraine's President Zelensky vowed to push on against Russia's invading forces. He also praised the resilience of the Ukrainian people, who have endured 12 months of sustained attack. Here, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has pledged the UK's continued support for Ukraine and urged world leaders to move faster in arming Ukrainian troops. More from Vincent as the war enters its second year.
One year since Russia made war on Kyiv, this city is still free. But freedom has come at a price, and this morning, a drum beat in memory of lives given in defence of this country.
Я пишаюся вами.
The invader said we wouldn't last 3 days, said Volodymyr Zelensky, but we did, and then a fourth and a fifth, and we know every tomorrow is worth fighting for. Ukrainian resilience has been immense, but there was no celebration here. This was a solemn morning where the dead were honoured and the president stooped to shake the hand of a fallen soldier's son. As the morning broke across Western Europe, the last post sounded again, and allies stood shoulder to shoulder at one of the encampments in England, where Ukrainian volunteers are being trained to continue their fight.
I definitely think it's a much better position than we were last year about, the likelihood of a Russian victory. I think is very, very low. I think our intelligence assessment this morning demonstrate that they've basically given up on the big objectives, and all they're really trying to do is sort of skirmish in meters every day at the cost of thousands of lives. But we have to stick at it, and I think that's the key.
In city squares and community centres up and down the UK, the places where Ukrainians have been given refuge, they found some silent solace together. 1 year since everything changed. And in Westminster this morning, a moment of rare beauty. Ukraine's national anthem sung in Downing Street. The power and poignancy of this day contained within its first line. The glory of Ukraine has not yet perished, nor its freedom. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
Let's go now to our correspondent Emma Murphy, who is live this lunchtime from the city of Kharkiv. And Emma, very much an active war where you are.
Yes, whilst we've heard in Geraint's report there has been a moment to pause to consider what's happened over the last year in the area where the battle is raging the most fiercely, on the Eastern Front, there has been no pause. It is a hot battle and it is a very vicious one. We've spent the past days there seeing firsthand just how hard the Ukrainians are fighting to regain their territory, how hard the Russians are fighting to try and take more of it. When we were down on that front line, it was about a kilometre between the Ukrainian position and the Russian positions. And for days now, they have been battling over tiny pieces of land. The Ukrainians trying to push forward, the Russians pushing back, and it's coming at huge cost in terms of injuries, casualties, and also weaponry. The one thing that I think that most of those down on the front near Bakhmut, the longest battle of this year-long war, that people would be asking for is, yes, thank you very much for your support and remembering us, but we need your weapons and we need more of them and we need them more quickly, because they are really getting through weapons and artillery at an astonishing rate there.
And Emma, we just saw the very recent pictures, didn't we? But we've been following this invasion and the resistance from Ukraine for a year now, and the toll has been immense, hasn't it?
Yes, the toll on both sides is really very significant. It's difficult to try and get exact figures, but the latest indication we're getting from Western sources is that around 100,000 Ukrainians are thought to have been killed or injured in this year of battle, and around 188,000 Russians killed or injured. Now, the reason that figure is higher is because on the attack is a much more difficult place to stay safe. But I think the reality is those figures will be an awful lot higher, and neither side are willing to really give truth to how many are being lost in this war.
All right, Emma in Kyiv in Ukraine, thank you. Back here and in Northern Ireland, the leaders of all main political parties have stood together to condemn the shooting of an off-duty police officer in Omagh. John Caldwell was attacked in front of his young son and remains in a critical condition in hospital. Ben Chapman is in Belfast for us this lunchtime. Ben, a rare show of political unity today.
Yes, and one described by the Chief Constable here as an important and symbolic moment. 5 political leaders who've been unable to get round a table and form a government here in Northern Ireland did so today, united in outrage at this shooting. They met the Chief Constable to discuss the investigation and to condemn what happened on Wednesday night when 2 masked men shot DCI John Caldwell in a car park full of children in front of his son outside a sports centre in Omagh. This is what the leaders of the 2 biggest political parties had to say this morning.
It is so important in moments like this that we stand united, and we do stand here united as one voice in our condemnation against this horrific attack on a police officer, someone who's part of our community.
It was never acceptable, and it is not acceptable now. It will not be tolerated. And we stand foursquare with the police to ensure that those who have been responsible for this attack are brought to justice.
And Ben, what is the latest on DCI Caldwell's condition?
Well, we're told that he remains critically ill and heavily sedated in hospital. The Chief Constable here has spoken to John Caldwell's family. He says they have been heavily affected by what happened. The head of the Police Federation here told me earlier that he has suffered serious life-changing injuries after being shot at least 4 times. Now, the police say the primary focus of their investigation is on the violent dissident Republican group, the New IRA. This morning they arrested a 22-year-old man under the Terrorism Act. They're questioning him along with another 3 men in their 30s and 40s in connection with John Caldwell's attempted murder.
All right, Ben in Belfast, thank you. The British Medical Association has announced junior doctors in England will strike on 3 days in March in a dispute over pay. The walkout is set to go ahead on the 13th, 14th and 15th of March. They want a pay increase to make up for 15 years of inflation. The NHS Confederation has said the strikes will have a major impact on services for patients, including the cancellation of appointments and procedures. In the last hour, the nominees to take over as leader of the SNP and become Scotland's First Minister have been confirmed, and they're all through to the next stage. Kate Forbes remains a frontrunner in the most recent poll, even though she's faced criticism for her beliefs on gay marriage. Well, our Scotland reporter, Louise Scott, is in Edinburgh this lunchtime. And Louise, you've been speaking to the last candidate to launch their campaign.
That's right. Ash Regan may be best known for having stepped down from Nicola Sturgeon's cabinet, disagreeing with her over the gender reform bill. She's also previously said the First Minister was out of step with the party. Her campaign is focusing on how she'll deliver independence. She disagrees with Nicola Sturgeon's plan for a de facto referendum at the next general election. But her terminology, a voter empowerment mechanism, is sounding very similar.
First election that we get over 50% plus one, we will see that as a clear instruction from the people of Scotland that they want us to commence negotiations.
That's the same as a de facto referendum if you got 50 plus one at the next general election.
But then if we don't, we can do it at the next election. So
it's just de facto referendum again and again and again until you get 50 plus one?
No, it's not.
What's different?
The fact that it is giving the power back to the people of Scotland, and that we will also work with all the other independence parties as well.
Well, the other two candidates are riding higher in the polls amongst SNP voters, and Kate Forbes is leading that at the moment, despite her comments over gay marriage, leading to some MSPs rescinding their support. But amongst the members, Humza Yousaf seems to be the more popular candidate. However, yesterday he was facing mounting criticism over his handling of the NHS. There's clear divisions within the party. The voting will open on the 13th of March, and we'll know by the end of the month who will be the next leader.
Right, Louise in Edinburgh, thank you. The cost of food inflation on households around the country continues to bite, but not equally, as it turns out. A survey by consumer group Which found that the effect of rising inflation on so-called value goods has far outstripped that of branded and premium products. The analysis of 8 major supermarkets found the overall price of groceries has risen by almost 16% in a year. But the value items are up by over 21%, while branded products rose by just over 13%. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Lisa Webb from Which, who is in our Cardiff newsroom. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us at this lunchtime. So difficult times for so many at the moment, but more evidence now that those who are feeling the pinch the most are actually being hit the hardest. Oh, we seem to be having a few sound difficulties with Lisa in our Cardiff studio for now. Hopefully we can come back to Lisa in just a moment. But some other news, and a monument honouring Ukraine will be arriving in Liverpool's iconic Strawberry Fields in time for the Eurovision Song Contest in May. The Ukrainian Peace Monument is 22 feet tall and has been described as a symbol of hope and peace around the world. It's expected to be moved to Ukraine permanently when it's safe to do so. And parts of Southern California have received their first blizzard warning in over 30 years. A record 8 feet of snowfall is expected to fall in mountains to the east of Los Angeles by tomorrow. A storm has already brought temperatures below freezing to the majority of the northern United States. Well, let's go back to that story on supermarket own brands, and I think we can now speak to Lisa from Which. No, we're not. We're gonna shoppers that rely on the cheapest supermarket ranges are bearing the brunt of grocery inflation. As we told you earlier, new figures show a study by consumer group Which found that the price of value items far outstripped those of branded and premium products. Barbara Holmes has more on the report.
Over the last year, shoppers have become keenly aware that the price of everyday essentials going into their shopping trolleys has skyrocketed. But those trying the hardest to make their money stretch have seen some of the biggest hikes. A study of 25,000 food and drink products by the consumer group Which has shown that the price of value range goods increased at a faster rate than branded or premium items. The analysis of 8 major supermarkets found that while the price of groceries overall has risen almost 16% in a year, Value items are up over 21%. In comparison, branded goods rose by just over 13%. This would suggest that those already struggling to put food on the table are being disproportionately hit by the cost of living crisis. Dairy products saw some of the sharpest inflation. Butter and spreads increased by almost 30%, while milk went up just over 26%, and cheese was almost 24% more expensive overall, which found that while discount shops were still generally cheaper than their competitors, they had some of the sharpest increases. Of the 8 supermarkets that were compared, Lidl's prices had increased the most, rising 23.6% from January to January, compared to a rise of 10.4% at Ocado. So while the prices continue to increase, the cheapest choices are fewer and further between. Barbara Holmes, ITV News.
Now, the Roald Dahl row took a new twist in the last hour. The publisher of his works, Puffin UK, wrote new versions of his classics, taking on the twits and other characters by changing language on weight, mental health and appearance. Well, that brought quite the backlash. Our reporter Mark McQuillan's been following this for us. So, Mark, what's happened now then?
Lucrezia, this latest development will essentially give readers a choice, having the option of the old classic Roald Dahl books as they were originally written, or the new versions which have been edited in some parts, as we've been speaking about in recent weeks, following a review by the publishers of language used at the time. We've got to remember some of these books were written more than 50 years ago. What kind of language are we talking about? Well, taking out references to weight, mental health, gender, race, for example. So taking the character from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Augustus Gloop. In the rewrite version, it would take out the word fat and have him as enormous, we understand. So that'd be one example of a potential change in the rewrite. Now, all of this has led to a significant backlash from far and wide, really. Award-winning author Salman Rushdie described the changes as absurd. The Prime Minister has even got involved, quoting the BFG, saying we shouldn't gobble funk around with words. And just yesterday, the Queen Consort Camilla is reported to have said this at a reception for her online book club. Please remain true to your calling, unimpeded by those who may wish to curb the freedom of your expression or impose limits on your imagination. As for the publishers, Puffin, well, they say they've listened to this ongoing debate and recognise the importance of keeping Dahl's classic texts in print. So this is the latest twist in a story about books which are, of course, among the most well-known to have been written. Yeah, 2 versions of everything. Mark, thank you. Next is lunchtime. Patients at a hospital in Harlow got a surprise this morning. A visit from a rock legend. Sir Rod Stewart was there to see for himself how staff are coping and to see how delays to scans are benefiting from some of his own cash after he made a sizable donation to help with the backlog. Well, Hannah Pettifer is in Harlow for us this lunchtime. Hannah, he's not the average hospital visitor, is he?
No, that's right. It was a flying visit to Harlow Hospital this morning. Sir Rod Stewart turned up in his white Rolls-Royce and then went on to greet medical staff and patients whose scans he'd paid for. The point of his visit, he said, was to prove that he wasn't all mouth and no trousers because, of course, 4 weeks ago, he'd called into a Sky News phone-in about the NHS in crisis and said that he wanted to pay for between 10 to 20 people's scans. Well, the money has now paid for the mobile scanning unit behind me and up to 40 people's scans, and a reduction of about 10% on the waiting list here. And he says this is something that he wants to continue doing.
Well, because so many things are said and no one follows through, I just want everyone to know that I followed through, you know. And I'd like to do it in Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh, all the cities all across England.
I mean, how long are you going to do this for? Is this
as long as it takes, you know. It doesn't really cost a great deal of money, you know, so that's why I want to do it as many places as I can.
Well, one of the patients whose scans Sir Rod Stewart had paid for was Omari Ryan. He said he'd been on the waiting list for an MRI on his knee for the past 4 months.
I said, your hand, I said, that's the same. Then he shook my hand, then I heard the crowd. You know, what's the word? It was a maze. It was a maze. Yeah, it's a relief of knowing that, you know, I have it done now, so I don't know what's going on. If my left knees now, yeah, so I'm so happy now.
Well, when Sir Rod Stewart first called into that news channel, he said that he wanted to do something good. He said he wanted to help people. Well, today he reiterated that, but also said that this was something he was going to continue doing, so expect more money for mobile scanning units to come.
Hannah, thank you. And finally, train spotting doesn't get better than this. The Flying Scotsman is celebrating its 100th anniversary, and to mark the day, the iconic locomotive was centre stage in Edinburgh, as Martha Fairley reports.
It is the most famous steam locomotive in the world. Flying Scotsman was in its heyday the height of luxury in modern rail travel, speeding passengers north from London King's Cross to Edinburgh Waverley, where today the locomotive arrived to celebrate its centenary. But it didn't get its famous name until a year after it went into service.
It's named after the route, which is the 10 a.m. train out of King's Cross up to Waverley, which is why we're here today, up to Waverley, and that's called the Flying Scotsman route, and so the train was named Flying Scotsman.
Flying Scotsman was built in Doncaster at a cost of £8,000.
Here's the Flying Scot at around 90 miles an hour.
It went on to become the first to travel non-stop between Edinburgh and London, and the first to reach speeds of 100 miles an hour. It even became the first steam locomotive to circumnavigate the globe, taking a trip to Australia in the 80s. In 2006, it underwent extensive restoration work to bring it back to its former glory, and is now a working exhibit at the National Railway Museum in York. For steam engine enthusiasts, it's still a very special piece of history.
So every time you get on the footplate or inside the firebox or underneath the engine to prep it, maintain it, it's always a special thing. You know, you've got to treat the machine with respect. They're old machines, obviously it's 100-year-old, it's very special today. So yeah, that's always at the back of your mind. And I've done this all my life, that's all I ever done.
And for today's travellers, the train standing at platform 2 was a brief reminder of the glorious age of rail, powered by the greatest locomotive of them all. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Glorious indeed. That's it from everyone on Lunchtime. Bye-bye.